There was a time when dirt was just dirt, not something that stole a man's future with every gust of wind. The dust storm rolled in like Judgment Day, a towering wall of earth turned to fury, blotting out the sun and carrying away what little hope remained. 3 years of drought had already bled this land dry, leaving nothing but cracked soil and broken promises. From the rise of his family's farm, he could see it all disappearing, 4 generations of sweat and sacrifice about to be foreclosed upon in 45 days. The vultures were already circling men in expensive trucks with corporate credit cards and empty eyes, waiting for him to finally break. He'd survived war, survived losing his wife, survived watching his son choose concrete canyons over open fields. But this might be the battle he couldn't win. Then she appeared through the haze, a stranger with city hands and calculating eyes asking for help with a broken-down harvester. Neither of them knew it yet, but by sundown, everything would change. In the heartland, desperation and salvation often arrive wearing the same dust-covered boots. The dust storm appeared without warning, a roiling wall of topsoil that blotted out the horizon. Ray Callahan squinted at the approaching cloud as he wrestled with the seized gears of his ancient combine harvester. His weathered hands, mapped with calluses and creased by 62 years of Nebraska sun, gripped the wrench until his knuckles whitened. "Come on, you stubborn son of a bitch," he muttered, putting his shoulder into it. The metal finally gave with a reluctant groan. He'd bought this machine when Bill Clinton was still in office. Now it was held together with baling wire, desperation, and the mechanical ingenuity that came from decades of making do. The radio tucked in his shirt pocket crackled with the automated voice of the National Weather Service, warning of winds gusting to 50 miles per hour. Ray ignored it. Weather warnings were for people with options. From his position on the rise, he could see most of his 320 acres Callahan land for 4 generations, since his great-grandfather staked his claim after returning from World War I. The winter wheat stood brittle and stunted, ravaged by 3 years of drought. What should have been waist-high golden waves barely reached his knees. He'd be lucky to harvest half his usual yield, which itself had been declining for years. The combine needed to work today. The bank wouldn't care about dust storms or broken machinery when the loan payment came due in 45 days. $175,000 hanging over his head like a guillotine blade. 3 missed payments already. The certified letter from Heartland First had used the word foreclosure twice in the first paragraph. Ray's back spasmed as he straightened, a reminder of the IED that had nearly killed him outside Fallujah in his final tour with the Marines. The VA check helped, but not enough to cover the medical bills that had piled up after Sarah's cancer took her 5 years ago. $600,000 to lose his wife anyway. The American healthcare system's idea of a fair deal. The radio squawked again. Ray wiped sweat from his eyes, leaving a streak of grease across his forehead. That's when he heard the panicked lowing. Ah, hell! 5 of his remaining cattle had somehow worked their way through the fence again. They were moving at a trot toward the county road, spooked by the approaching dust. If they reached the highway beyond, Ray was down the ladder and running before he had time to think, ignoring the protest from his lower back. He sprinted across the hard-packed earth, dust kicking up beneath his boots. The storm was rolling in faster now, the leading edge of it already dimming the sunlight to an eerie amber glow. "Hey, back up!" Ray shouted, waving his arms as he cut across the field to intercept the cattle. The lead cow, an ornery Hereford he'd named Trouble, bellowed defiantly and picked up speed. Ray reached the road just as the first gusts hit, bringing stinging particles of dirt and the smell of electricity. The cattle were scattered now, confused by the sudden darkness of the storm. 2 had already made it to the asphalt. He could hear an engine approaching, the sound distorted by the wind. "Get back!" Ray yelled, running toward Trouble, trying to turn her away from the road. The cow lowered her head stubbornly. The truck appeared out of the dust like a ghost, going too fast for conditions. Ray waved his arms frantically, trying to get the driver's attention. The truck's brakes squealed as it fishtailed on the asphalt, missing Ray by inches. It skidded to a stop 20 yards down the road. "Get your damn cows off the highway!" Callahan! The driver leaned out his window, Dave Wilson from 3 properties over, his face a mask of dust and fury. Working on it, Ray shouted back, already moving toward the second cow. The wind was howling now, visibility down to almost nothing. He grabbed Trouble's halter, pulling hard to direct her back toward the broken section of fence. The other cattle, following their leader, reluctantly turned. It took 15 minutes of cursing, cajoling, and sweating before Ray had all 5 animals secured in their pasture. He reinforced the broken fence with baling wire, another temporary fix he couldn't afford to make permanent. By the time he finished, the dust storm had enveloped everything. He pulled his bandana over his nose and mouth and headed back to the combine. The day was already half gone, and he hadn't harvested a single acre. As he crested the small rise that separated his working fields from the old Johnson property line, Ray saw something unexpected through the swirling dust. A flicker of movement, then a harsh grinding sound. Someone was running machinery on the abandoned Johnson land. No one had worked that property since old Frank Johnson had died 3 years back, his children too busy with careers in Minneapolis to care about their inheritance. Ray changed course, squinting against the stinging particles. As he drew closer, he made out the silhouette of an ancient pull-behind combine, even older than his laboring through a modest stand of barley. The machine was belching black smoke, the sound of metal grinding against metal carrying across the field. Whoever was driving didn't know what they were doing. At this rate, they'd destroy the equipment before harvesting a single acre. Then he saw the smoke change color, from black to a more ominous gray-white. Something was burning. "Hey!" Ray shouted, breaking into a run despite his protesting back. "Stop the machine! You've got a fire!" The combine continued for another 30 yards before jerking to a halt. The figure in the operator's seat seemed frozen for a moment, then scrambled down the metal steps with surprising agility. As Ray closed the distance, he was startled to see it was a woman Asian American, maybe mid-50s, dressed in what appeared to be brand new work clothes and a dust mask. She was trying to find the fire extinguisher mounted on the side of the combine, her movements urgent but uncertain. "Move aside!" Ray reached her, quickly locating the extinguisher where it had always been on that model. The fire was spreading quickly along an oil line near the engine housing. He yanked the pin and directed the spray at the base of the flames, methodically sweeping as he'd been taught in the Marines. The woman backed away, giving him room to work. The fire resisted at first, but Ray persisted, moving closer despite the heat. A sudden shift in the wind brought a tongue of flame toward his arm. He felt the searing pain as it caught his sleeve, but kept the extinguisher trained on the main body of the fire. Finally, the flames receded, leaving behind scorched metal and the acrid smell of burnt oil and plastic. Ray dropped the empty extinguisher and quickly shrugged out of his shirt, beating his smoldering sleeve against his leg to ensure the fire was out. His forearm was already blistering where the flame had touched it. "You're hurt." The woman had pulled down her dust mask, revealing a face that was both concerned and remarkably composed given the circumstances. Her accent was pure American Midwest, surprising Ray. He'd expected something else, though he couldn't have said what. "It's nothing." Ray examined his arm with the detached assessment of someone long accustomed to injury. Second-degree burn, but small. He'd had worse shaving. "What the hell were you doing running this dinosaur in these conditions? Damn thing hasn't been maintained in years." The woman straightened, a flash of something pride defiance crossing her features. "I was trying to bring in this barley before the storm ruined it." She gestured to the modest field behind her. "I didn't realize the equipment was in such poor condition." Ray looked more closely at the barley. Now that he was paying attention, he could see it wasn't the wild volunteer crop he'd assumed. This had been deliberately planted, the rows too even for nature's work. "You're working the Johnson land?" he asked, unsuspicious now. "Far as I knew, it was still tied up in probate." "I'm leasing it." The woman extended her hand. "Victoria Chen. Everyone calls me Vicky. I'm running a small test plot for drought-resistant barley varieties." Her grip was firm, her palm softer than Ray would have expected for someone working a harvest. Thank you for your help, Mr. Callahan. Ray Callahan. He didn't take the offered hand, instead turning back to examine the combine. This fire started because the oil line is cracked and you're running it way too hot. Engine needs a complete overhaul before it goes anywhere near a field again. I see. Victoria Vicky didn't seem offended by his brusqueness. Are you a mechanic as well as a farmer? Around here, you're both or you're broke. Sometimes both. Ray wiped his good hand on his jeans. Your test plot is about to be buried in dust. Storm like this can strip a field bare. So I'm learning. She was studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, her eyes taking in his burned arm, his dust-caked features, the lines of fatigue etched into his face. You're my neighbor then, the property to the east. Ray nodded. Going on 40 years. Took over from my father in '85. Before Vicky could respond, the distinctive rumble of a high-end pickup truck cut through the howling wind. A black Ford F-350, barely 5 years old and gleaming despite the dust, pulled up alongside the field. The driver's side window rolled down to reveal a man in his late 30s, too well dressed for farm country in his crisp button-down and designer sunglasses. Having some equipment trouble, Miss Chen. The man's voice carried a note of theatrical concern that set Ray's teeth on edge instantly. I warned you that Johnson's old equipment wasn't worth the scrap metal price. The combine needs work. Sean, nothing unexpected. Vicky's tone had cooled noticeably. Sean Maxwell, the man said to Ray, not bothering to exit his air-conditioned cab. Pinnacle Agro, you must be Callahan from next door. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Still hanging on by your fingernails. I see. Ray felt his jaw tighten. Pinnacle had been buying up struggling farms across 3 counties, consolidating them into massive industrial operations run by a skeleton crew of poorly paid workers. They'd approached him twice with insultingly low offers. Still kicking, Ray replied flatly. Don't you have some family farm to foreclose on today? Maxwell. The smile vanished. Actually, I came to remind Ms. Chen here that her experimental lease doesn't include equipment rights. That combine belongs to the Johnson estate, which is under contract with Pinnacle. You didn't mention that when I signed the lease, Vicky said, crossing her arms. Must have slipped my mind. Maxwell's attention shifted back to Ray. Speaking of contracts, Callahan, Heartland, first mentioned you're coming up on a deadline. 45 days. Isn't it Pinnacle's offer still stands? Though I should warn you the price has adjusted to reflect current market conditions. Meaning it's lower, Ray said flatly. Meaning it's realistic. Maxwell's tone hardened. The drought isn't ending. Callahan, the long-range forecast shows another dry winter. Men like you are a dying breed, too stubborn to see the writing on the wall. Appreciate the concern, Ray said, his voice dangerously calm. Now get the hell off my property line. Maxwell laughed. Such hospitality. Is this how you're treating your new neighbor? He nodded toward Vicky. Ms. Chen here is just dabbling. Callahan, playing farmer with corporate research money. She'll be gone when her experiment fails, just like every other small operation in this valley. My work here is perfectly legitimate. Mr. Maxwell, Vicky interjected, and I don't appreciate your characterization of it. Of course. Maxwell held up his hands in mock surrender. We're all just trying to make agriculture great again. Right? He put the truck in gear but paused before pulling away. Oh, Callahan, almost forgot. Sheriff mentioned some of your cattle were loose on County Road 23 last week. 3rd time this year, isn't it? Be a shame if someone got hurt because of your negligence. Are you threatening me? Maxwell. Ray took a step toward the truck. Maxwell's response was to gun the engine. As he pulled away, his oversized side mirror caught Ray's ancient pickup truck, parked further down the fence line. The sound of breaking glass punctuated the howling wind as Ray's driver's side window shattered. Oops, Maxwell called out the window. Send the bill to Pinnacle. We'll add it to your tab. Ray stood rigid as the black truck disappeared into the dust storm. The temptation to go after Maxwell, to drag him from that air-conditioned cab and teach him some manners, was nearly overwhelming. Only the lifetime of discipline, first from his Marine father, then from his own military service, kept him rooted in place. "Is he always like that?" Vicky asked quietly. "Maxwell, that was him being charming." Ray turned back to examine the damaged combine, needing something to focus on besides his anger. "You leased from Pinnacle. From the Johnson estate manager. Pinnacle is handling the sale. Apparently." Vicky brushed dust from her sleeve, a futile gesture in the storm. "I didn't realize they were so aggressive. They're vultures." Ray tested a belt on the combine, finding it loose. "They've bought up 6 family farms in the last year, convert everything to industrial monoculture, bring in a few minimum wage workers instead of families that have worked the land for generations." Vicky was quiet for a moment, studying him. "You don't seem like the type to lose cattle." "Not 3 times." Ray's jaw tightened. "Maxwell's had his people cutting my fences. Can't prove it, but fences don't just fall down in the same places over and over. That's criminal. That's business." Ray stepped back from the combine. "This thing isn't going anywhere today. Engine's shot, and even if it wasn't, you'd be harvesting dust instead of barley." Vicky surveyed the field, disappointment evident on her face. "I was afraid of that. 3 months of growth, about to be buried." Despite himself, Ray felt a twinge of sympathy. Every farmer knew the heartbreak of watching a crop destroyed by forces beyond their control. "What's this experiment you're running? Drought-resistant barley developed with selective breeding techniques." Vicky's expression brightened slightly as she spoke. "No GMO, just accelerated traditional methods. The genetic stock comes from heritage varieties that survived the Dust Bowl." Ray found himself reluctantly impressed. "Smart approach. Modern barley's been bred for yield, not resilience. Lost those drought-hardy traits?" "Exactly." Vicky seemed pleased by his understanding. "This test plot has received 40% less water than conventional varieties would require. And it was thriving until—" She gestured at the storm around them. Ray nodded, looking again at the crop. Despite the conditions, the barley did look surprisingly healthy, or had, before the dust storm hit. "Who are you with University Extension Program, private research?" Vicky said, her answer prompt but vague. "My company is developing sustainable agriculture solutions for changing climate conditions." Before Ray could press further, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, squinting at the screen through a fine layer of dust that had somehow penetrated the case. The bank. Again. He declined the call with a swipe of his thumb. "I need to get back to my equipment," he said, already turning away. "Storm might break by evening. If you're smart, you'll wait until then to do anything with this combine." "Wait," Vicky stepped forward. "Your arm needs treatment. At least let me help with that burn." When he hesitated, she added, "I have a first aid kit in my truck. It's the least I can do after you stop that fire." Ray glanced down at his arm, where an angry red blister was forming. The adrenaline was wearing off, the pain beginning to register. He'd planned to slap some aloe on it and get back to work, but proper treatment would reduce the risk of infection. "Fine," he conceded, "but make it quick. I've got a harvest dying on the stalk." Vicky's truck turned out to be a late-model Toyota 4Runner, dust-covered but otherwise pristine. She opened the back to reveal an interior that looked more like a mobile office than a farm vehicle laptop, portable printer, file boxes neatly labeled. The first aid kit she retrieved was professional grade, far more comprehensive than the basic one Ray kept in his glove compartment. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to the open tailgate. Her tone had shifted, becoming more authoritative. Ray found himself complying before he had consciously decided to do so, a response to the natural command in her voice. She examined the burn with clinical efficiency, cleaning it with antiseptic wipes that stung like hell, but which Ray endured without comment. Her hands were steady and surprisingly skilled as she applied burn ointment, then covered the wound with a non-stick dressing. "You've done this before." Ray observed as she secured the bandage with medical tape. I have some medical training, Vicky said, her focus on her work. You're lucky this is relatively minor, second degree, but limited to a small area. Had worse shaving, Ray repeated his earlier assessment, earning a skeptical look. You must be a very aggressive shaver, Mr. Callahan. A hint of humor colored her voice. Keep this clean and rebandage it tonight. If you see any signs of infection, increased redness, swelling, pus, get to a doctor. Sure thing, Doc. Ray flexed his arm experimentally. The bandage was professional, allowing movement while protecting the burn. Thanks. Vicky began repacking the first aid kit with the same efficiency she'd shown in treating his injury. Up close, Ray could see the fine lines around her eyes, the streak of silver at her temple that had been partially hidden by dust. She was fit, her movements economical, but there was something in the careful way she straightened that suggested she might have back issues of her own. So what's your real interest in drought-resistant barley? Ray asked abruptly. Private research sounds expensive for a crop with slim margins. Vicky closed the first aid kit with a definitive snap. Climate change is making traditional growing regions increasingly unreliable. Companies that develop adaptable crop varieties now will be positioned to help farmers transition. She met his gaze directly. Not everyone in agriculture is like Pinnacle, Mr. Callahan. Some of us are trying to preserve family farming, not destroy it. Ray had heard similar pitches before from seed companies, equipment manufacturers, tech startups promising agricultural revolutions through sensors and drones. All of them eventually wanted the same thing: his data, his customer relationships, or his land itself. Noble mission, he said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Good luck with that combine. You'll need a complete engine rebuild before it moves another foot. He stood, preparing to leave. I could use some help, Vicky said suddenly. With the harvest, I'll pay. Of course. Ray paused. I've got my own crops to worry about. I understand that, but I'm offering cash. Mr. Callahan, immediate payment for skilled labor. Vicky's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in her eyes, a calculation, an assessment that made Ray think this was more than a spontaneous offer. My barley needs to be harvested within the next 2 weeks. Once this storm passes, the data is crucial for our research. Cash. The word hung between them. Ray's next insurance payment was due in 10 days. The cattle feed was running low. His truck window now needed repair. And the bank. How much, he heard himself asking. $35 an hour. I provide the equipment properly repaired. Not that death trap. 10 hours minimum guaranteed. Likely more. It was a generous rate for farm work, suspiciously generous. But Ray was in no position to refuse good money, not with foreclosure looming. I'll need to see to my own harvest first, when the weather allows, he said. Of course, Vicky nodded. I wouldn't expect otherwise. And I picked the equipment service shop. No shortcuts on repairs? Agreed. Ray studied her, trying to get a read on this strange woman who appeared out of nowhere, with new work clothes, medical training, and corporate backing. Everything about her story felt incomplete, edges showing where pieces had been deliberately omitted. I'm not signing anything, he said finally. We shake on it. We have a deal. I help until your barley's in or until my own crops need attention, whichever comes first. Vicky extended her hand without hesitation. Deal. Ray took it, noting again the contradiction. Her grip was firm, but her palm soft. Not the hand of someone who regularly operated farm equipment. Whatever Victoria Chen's game was, Ray doubted it was as straightforward as agricultural research. But with $175,000 in debt and a dying crop, he couldn't afford to turn down good money, no matter where it came from. The dust storm raged for another 3 hours, scouring the fields and reducing visibility to near zero. Ray spent the time in his barn, patching what equipment he could and trying to ignore the throbbing in his burned arm. By sunset, the wind had finally died down, leaving behind a landscape transformed fields partially buried, irrigation channels clogged with silt, and a fine layer of dust covering every surface like volcanic ash. Ray's phone buzzed again as he was assessing the damage to his winter wheat. His son this time. Michael only called when he wanted something or when he was gearing up for another lecture about selling the farm. Ray let it go to voicemail. Whatever Michael had to say, it could wait until Ray had figured out if he still had a crop worth harvesting. The wheat had taken a beating, but it wasn't a total loss. With the right equipment adjustments, he could still bring in maybe 60% of his expected yield, assuming no more dust storms hit before he could get it all in. It wouldn't be enough to satisfy the bank, but it might buy him some time. As darkness fell, Ray drove his pickup back to the farmhouse, the broken window now covered with a piece of plastic tarp secured with duct tape. The truck had been his father's before it was his, a 1997 Ford F-150 with over 300,000 miles on the odometer. Like everything else in Ray's life, it was worn but functional, hanging on through sheer stubbornness and regular maintenance. The farmhouse stood dark against the night sky, a two-story structure built in the 1930s and expanded by each generation of Callahans. Ray's great-grandfather had built the original 4 rooms. His grandfather had added the second story after returning from World War II. Ray's father had modernized the kitchen and added indoor plumbing in the 1960s. Ray himself had replaced the roof and heating system in the 1990s, back when the farm was still turning a reliable profit. He hadn't changed much since Sarah died. Her garden was gone now, reclaimed by grass and weeds after the first year without her. The curtains she'd sewn still hung in the windows, faded by the sun. Sometimes Ray imagined he could still smell her perfume in their bedroom, but he knew it was just his mind playing tricks. 5 years was a long time. The scent of her had faded even from the clothes he couldn't bring himself to donate, still hanging in the closet like ghosts. Ray showered off the day's dust and grime, careful to keep his bandaged arm dry as Vicky had instructed. The hot water eased some of the ache in his back, but not the bone-deep fatigue that came from fighting a losing battle against nature, economics, and time itself. At 62, he was a decade past when his father had turned the operation over to him. But Michael had made it clear he had no interest in farming. His life was in Chicago, in the financial world Ray barely understood, with his fiancée who'd visited the farm exactly once and had spent the entire time checking her phone for a signal. After a dinner of microwaved leftovers, Ray sat at the kitchen table with his account book spread before him. The numbers hadn't improved since the last time he'd reviewed them. The columns of red ink told a story of declining yields, rising costs, and narrowing margins. The drought had accelerated the farm's decline, but the truth was that Callahan Farms had been struggling for years before the rain stopped. American agriculture had changed. Small family operations like his were being squeezed from both ends, rising input costs and falling commodity prices. The big corporate farms could absorb the pressure through scale and vertical integration. They owned the supply chain from seed to supermarket. Farmers like Ray were left fighting for scraps. The rational move would be to sell, take Pinnacle's offer, pay off the bank, and retire with whatever was left. Maybe move closer to Michael in Chicago, though the thought of living in a city made Ray's skin crawl. Maxwell was right about one thing: men like Ray were a dying breed. The stubborn ones who believed that working your own land still meant something in America. Ray closed the ledger and reached for the bottle of bourbon on the shelf above the refrigerator. Sarah had hated his drinking, but he figured death had revoked her voting rights on the matter. He poured 2 fingers into a coffee mug the glasses had broken years ago, and he'd never replaced them, and took a sip, feeling the familiar burn. His phone buzzed again. The bank. Again. This time Ray answered. Callahan. Mr. Callahan, this is Teresa Wilkins from Heartland First Bank. The voice was professionally pleasant. I'm calling about your outstanding loan balance. I'm aware of the balance. Ms. Wilkins, we've been trying to reach you to discuss payment options before the foreclosure process advances further. Ray took another sip of bourbon. Unless those options include debt forgiveness or an act of God that ends this drought, I don't see much to discuss. There was a pause on the line. Mr. Callahan, we've received an inquiry about your loan. That got Ray's attention. What kind of inquiry? I'm not at liberty to share the details, but a third party has expressed interest in acquiring your debt note. Pinnacle? Ray's grip tightened on the mug. Maxwell's been pushing to buy the farm for months. I can't confirm or deny, save it. Ray cut her off. Tell Pinnacle they can talk to me directly if they want my land. I've got 45 days before you can legally foreclose, and I intend to use every one of them. Mr. Callahan, please consider your options carefully. The current offer would clear your debt entirely, with potentially some funds remaining. If foreclosure proceeds, you could still be liable for any deficiency between the sale price and your outstanding balance. It was a thinly veiled threat. If Ray forced the bank to foreclose, they'd make sure he walked away with nothing, possibly even additional debt. If he cooperated with Pinnacle's purchase, he might salvage something from the wreckage of his life's work. I'll take my chances, Ray said, his voice hard. Anything else? Teresa Wilkins sighed. We'll be in touch, Mr. Callahan. Please consider meeting with our loan officers to discuss restructuring options. Good night, Ms. Wilkins. Ray ended the call and drained his bourbon. The burn in his throat matched the one in his arm, and the smoldering anger in his chest. Pinnacle was circling, waiting for him to bleed out. Maxwell probably already had plans drawn up for Ray's property, where to bulldoze the old farmhouse, how to integrate Ray's fields into their massive operation, which chemical cocktails to dump on soil that the Callahans had nurtured for 4 generations. Not without a fight, Ray thought grimly. Not while he still had breath in his body. His phone buzzed one more time. Michael again. This time Ray answered. Hey, son. Dad. Michael's voice carried the particular combination of exasperation and concern that had become his default tone when speaking to his father. I've been trying to reach you all day. Been busy. Dust storm hit. Had to chase down some cattle. Fix equipment. The bank called me. Ray straightened in his chair. They had no right to do that. Your name isn't on the loan. They're worried about you. Dad, so am I. They said you're not returning calls, not considering offers. I'm considering plenty, Ray cut him off. Just not considering giving up my land to corporate vultures. Michael sighed, the sound carrying clearly across the digital connection. Ray could picture his son, probably sitting in his high-rise condo with its view of Lake Michigan, running a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from Ray, though he'd deny the similarity. Dad, be realistic. The farm hasn't turned a profit in 5 years. The drought isn't ending, and you're not getting any younger. Thank you for the news bulletin. Ray's tone was sharper than he intended. He took a breath. I've got some options in the works. Met a researcher today who's hired me for some harvest work. Good money. Harvest work, Dad. You're 62 with a bad back and a mountain of debt. You need a solution, not a side gig. It's a start, Ray insisted. And there's talk of federal drought relief coming through. Senator Warren introduced a bill. That bill is stalled in committee and you know it. Michael's frustration was evident. Dad, I've been talking with a financial advisor about your situation. Pinnacle's offer isn't the only option. There are agricultural land trusts, conservation easements, ways you could keep living in the house while liquidating the operational assets. So I could sit on my porch and watch someone else farm my land, be the local curiosity. The last Callahan, too stubborn to leave but too broke to farm. You could have a life, Dad. Michael's voice softened. Travel a bit. Come visit us in Chicago. Meet Elise's parents in Boston. Maybe even date again. Ray nearly laughed at that last suggestion. I'm a bit old for the dating scene. Son, Mom's been gone 5 years. She wouldn't want you alone on that farm until you die. The mention of Sarah landed like a physical blow. Don't tell me what your mother would want, Ray said quietly. You didn't know her like I did. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken grief. Michael had been in college when Sarah was diagnosed, in his first job when she died. He'd visited when he could, but he hadn't lived through the day-to-day horror of watching cancer consume the woman they both loved. Hadn't held her hand through chemo, hadn't changed her bed sheets when she was too weak to make it to the bathroom, hadn't listened to her last, rattling breaths in the hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and approaching death. "I miss her too, Dad," Michael said finally, his voice thick. "And I'm worried about you. This isn't just about the farm. It's about your future." "The farm is my future." Ray rubbed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. "It's who I am. Michael, without this land, I don't know what's left of me. You're my father. That's what's left. That's what matters." Michael paused. "Elise and I set a date, May 15th next year. Whether you're still on the farm or not, I want you there. Dad." The news should have been joyful, but it landed with complicated weight. May was planting season. Always had been. Always would be. Even mentioning that fact would start another argument, so Ray swallowed the observation. "I'll be there," he promised. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Think about what I said, about the land trusts. I can send you some information." "Sure, son. Send it over." Ray knew he wouldn't read it, and Michael probably knew it too, but it was easier than arguing. "I should get some sleep. Early start tomorrow." "Always is," Michael said, a hint of remembered childhood in his voice. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, son." Ray ended the call and sat in the silence of the kitchen, the only sound the humming of the ancient refrigerator. Outside, the night was clear after the storm, stars visible through the window in a way they never were in Chicago. One of the many things Michael had given up when he left for college and never really came back. The burn on Ray's arm throbbed, a counterpoint to the ache in his back and the hollow feeling in his chest. He thought about Vicky Chen, with her soft hands and her drought-resistant barley, another corporate researcher looking to profit from farmers' desperation. But she'd offered cash when he needed it most, and she'd treated his injury with unexpected skill. Small kindnesses meant something in farm country. Ray poured another finger of bourbon, sipped it slowly, and tried not to think about the fact that 45 days from now, he might no longer be a farmer. Might no longer be Ray Callahan of Callahan Farms, the fourth-generation steward of land his great-grandfather had claimed with a promise of hard work and faith in the future. Just an old man with a bad back and nowhere to go. The morning dawned clear, the air scrubbed clean by the previous day's winds. Ray was up before sunrise, as he had been every day since childhood. Farm habits died hard, if they died at all. He checked his burn, which looked better than expected, and rebandaged it as Vicky had instructed. Then he headed out to assess the damage to his crops in the full light of day. The news wasn't good. The winter wheat had suffered more than he'd initially estimated. The dust had scoured some areas down to bare soil, while other sections were partially buried. With careful harvesting, he might salvage 50% of the expected yield if the weather held and if his ancient combine didn't break down again. Ray was adjusting the cutting height on the combine when he heard the distinctive sound of a diesel engine approaching. He straightened, half expecting to see Maxwell's black F-350 returning for another round of threats. Instead, a tow truck pulled up near the barn, hauling the battered combine from the Johnson property. Behind it came Vicky's 4Runner, dust-free after yesterday's encounter. Ray watched as the tow truck operator unloaded the damaged combine near his equipment shed. Vicky spoke with the driver briefly, then headed in Ray's direction. Today she wore practical work clothes, again jeans, boots, and a long-sleeve shirt to protect against the sun, but they still had the look of recent purchase, without the worn-in comfort of a farmer's daily uniform. "Morning," she called as she approached. "Hope you don't mind. The mechanic said your equipment yard would be a better place to work on the combine than the open field." "My equipment yard?" Ray frowned. "Who's doing the work?" "Martinez Brothers. They're sending someone out this afternoon to assess the damage." Ray nodded, marginally satisfied. The Martinez family ran the best agricultural equipment repair service in the county. They weren't cheap, but they were thorough and honest. Your research budget must be substantial if you're having Martinez rebuild that antique. Vicky shrugged. It's cheaper than buying new equipment for a temporary project. She looked past him to the damaged wheat fields. Your crops took a hit. Nothing that hasn't happened before, Ray said, though both knew it was bad. Part of farming, some years feast, some years famine. More famine lately. The climate models suggest this region will see increased aridity and more frequent dust events over the next 2 decades, Vicky said, her tone shifting to something more formal, academic. Traditional farming methods will need to adapt. So I've heard, every agricultural conference for the past 10 years has been preaching the same gospel. Ray turned back to his combine. Doesn't help much when you're trying to bring in what's left of your crop today. Vicky watched him work for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Do you have help with your harvest? I mean, Ray almost laughed. Farm hands are expensive. Most went to the Pinnacle operations, where the paychecks don't bounce. You're doing this entirely alone. There was something like disbelief in her voice. Welcome to modern family farming, Miss Chen. Ray continued adjusting the cutting height. My son's in Chicago playing with other people's money. Can't afford hired help. So yeah, it's just me. Vicky was quiet for a long moment. Then, I could help. This time Ray did laugh. A short, sharp sound without much humor. No offense, but you nearly set that combine on fire trying to harvest half an acre of barley. My entire operation is a bit more complex. I'm a quick learner, Vicky said, a hint of steel entering her voice. And I'm stronger than I look. Ray straightened, really looking at her now. Despite her age mid-50s, he guessed Vicky Chen had the lean, muscular build of someone who stayed active. But there was a world of difference between corporate wellness programs and the grueling physical demands of bringing in a harvest. Why would you want to help me? You've got your own project. My barley needs another few days to recover from the dust before harvest makes sense. In the meantime, I'm paying you for help you can't provide yet. Vicky met his gaze directly. I believe in fair exchanges. Mr. Callahan, you help me. I help you. Ray studied her, trying to decipher her angle. In his experience, corporate types always had one. Martinez will charge you an arm and a leg to rebuild that engine. Probably tell you it's not worth fixing. Probably, Vicky agreed easily. In which case, I'll find another solution. But right now, your crop is at risk, and I have time and willingness to help. The smart move would be to refuse. Whatever game Vicky Chen was playing, it wasn't as simple as agricultural research. Ray had survived in farming this long by being cautious with strangers, especially ones connected to corporate money. But his wheat was dying in the field. His arm was burned. His back was one wrong move away from putting him out of commission, and foreclosure was 44 days away. Ever driven a modern combine? He asked finally. No, Vicky admitted, but I can learn. 4 hours later, Ray was reluctantly impressed. Vicky Chen was, as she'd claimed, a quick learner. After a brief training session, she was handling the grain truck with reasonable competence, positioning it alongside the combine as Ray harvested. The work that would have taken him 3 days alone might now be completed in one, if they pushed through until dusk. They stopped briefly for lunch sandwiches Vicky had brought in a cooler, far better than the hastily assembled PB&J Ray would have made for himself. As they sat in the shade of the equipment shed, Ray found himself studying his unexpected helper. Up close, the signs of age were more evident, the fine lines around her eyes, the slight softening of her jawline. But there was a vitality to her that belied her years, an alertness in her gaze that reminded Ray of the officers he'd respected most during his Marine service. So, he said between bites of a surprisingly good roast beef sandwich, what's your real story, Ms. Chen? You're not just a field researcher. Vicky took a sip from her water bottle before answering. What makes you say that? Researchers don't have medical training. Don't bring gourmet lunches to the field. Don't have the budget to rebuild antique combines. Ray set down his sandwich. And they usually know more about farming equipment if they're testing agricultural products. A small smile played at the corners of Vicky's mouth. Perhaps I'm not a very good researcher. Or perhaps you're not primarily a researcher at all. Vicky seemed to consider his challenge for a moment, then nodded slightly, as if coming to a decision. I represent a company that's investing in sustainable agriculture technologies. The barley research is legitimate, but it's part of a larger assessment of this region's agricultural potential under changing conditions. What company? Ray pressed. A private equity firm with interests in agricultural technology, Vicky said, her answer smooth but still vague. We believe that family farms can remain viable with the right support systems and adaptive techniques. It sounded rehearsed to Ray's ears, the kind of corporate mission statement that looked good in annual reports but meant little in practice. And your medical training, that part of the job description for agricultural investors. Something flickered in Vicky's expression. Discomfort, perhaps, or surprise at his persistence. I was pre-med before switching to business. The training stuck. Ray didn't entirely believe her, but he let it go. Whatever Victoria Chen's true purpose in Heartwood Valley, she was helping him bring in his crop when he desperately needed it. That counted for something. They worked through the afternoon, falling into a rhythm that belied their short acquaintance. By 4 o'clock, they had harvested nearly 60% of the viable wheat. Ray was pushing himself harder than he should, ignoring the increasing pain in his back. If they could finish by tomorrow afternoon, he might actually have a chance of making his next insurance payment on time. The rumble of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Ray recognized the Martinez brothers' service truck, presumably arriving to assess the damaged combine, but instead of turning toward the equipment yard, the truck continued to the field where they were working. The driver parked and climbed out Luis Martinez, the older of the brothers who ran the repair business. Ray, Luis called, walking toward them with the rolling gait of a man who'd spent decades climbing on and off heavy machinery. Thought I'd find you out here. Luis? Ray shut down the combine and climbed carefully from the cab, hiding his wince as his back protested. Figured you'd be looking at that wreck of a Johnson combine. That's actually why I'm here. Luis glanced toward Vicky, who was approaching from the grain truck. Ms. Chen, right. We spoke on the phone. Vicky nodded. Have you had a chance to assess the combine? Just finished. Luis pulled off his cap and wiped his forehead. I'm afraid it's not good news. Engine's completely shot, cracked block, damaged head, multiple seized bearings. Probably been running hot for years without proper maintenance. Can it be repaired? Vicky asked. Luis shook his head. Not economically. Parts for that model are nearly impossible to find. And even if we could source them, the labor cost would be more than the machine's worth. You'd be better off buying a used combine that's 20 years newer. Vicky absorbed this with a nod. I see. Thank you for your honest assessment. Happy to provide a quote on alternatives, Luis offered. We sometimes get good used equipment on trade-ins. I'll consider it. Vicky turned to Ray. It seems I may need to adjust my plans. Ray wasn't surprised by the diagnosis. The Johnson combine had been on its last legs when Frank was still alive. 2 years sitting idle hadn't improved its condition. Might be able to rent you my backup for your barley harvest, Ray found himself offering, though the machine was hardly more reliable than the Johnson wreck. It's temperamental, but it runs. Generous of you, Luis commented, giving Ray a curious look. The Callahans weren't known for lending equipment. Too many farmers had gone under by being overly generous with their resources. Just business, Ray said gruffly. Ms. Chen is paying for harvest help. Speaking of business, Luis said, turning back to Vicky. There's something else you should know. Sean Maxwell from Pinnacle stopped by our shop this morning. Asked a lot of questions about who was working the Johnson land, what kind of equipment they were using. Seemed very interested in your operation. Miss Chen. Vicky's expression remained neutral, but Ray noticed her posture tighten slightly. Did he now? And what did you tell him? That client business is confidential? Luis grinned. Martinez brothers don't gossip about customers, but thought you should know he's asking around. I appreciate that, Vicky said. And your discretion. After Luis left, promising to send an estimate for the work they'd done assessing the combine, Ray and Vicky returned to harvesting. The rhythm of their work was different now, a tension introduced by the news of Maxwell's inquiries. Maxwell's taking an unusual interest in your barley experiment, Ray observed as they paused to refuel the combine. Makes me wonder what Pinnacle is worried about. Competition, perhaps, Vicky suggested, her tone carefully neutral. Or simply being thorough in their due diligence for the Johnson property purchase? Ray studied her, the late afternoon sun highlighting the silver in her dark hair. You're not telling me everything, Miss Chen. No, she agreed, meeting his gaze directly. I'm not, but I'm not lying to you either. Mr. Callahan, my interest in drought-resistant crops is genuine, as is my belief that family farms like yours deserve to survive. Before Ray could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another call from the bank. Instead, it was a text from Eliza Martinez, Luis's wife who ran the small medical clinic in town community dinner tonight at the church. 6 p.m. Hope to see you there. Ray. Been too long. Ray stared at the message, surprised. Eliza was right, it had been too long. After Sarah died, he'd gradually withdrawn from community events, the empty chair beside him too painful a reminder of his loss. The last community dinner he'd attended had been over 2 years ago. Problem, Vicky asked, noting his expression. No, just a reminder about the community dinner tonight. Ray pocketed his phone. We should get back to work if we want to finish this section before dark. Vicky glanced at the sky, where the sun was already beginning its descent. At this rate, we'll need another full day tomorrow to complete the harvest. Probably, Ray agreed, already climbing back into the combine. That's farming for you. Always more work than daylight. They worked until the gathering dusk made it too dangerous to continue, bringing in nearly 70% of the salvageable wheat. As they secured the equipment for the night, Ray found himself contemplating Eliza's invitation. The thought of facing the community's well-meaning questions and pitying looks was exhausting, but the alternative was another solitary evening in a house full of ghosts. There's a community dinner in town tonight, he found himself saying to Vicky as they walked toward their vehicles. Church basement, nothing fancy, just potluck and conversation. Vicky looked surprised by what was clearly an implicit invitation. That sounds nice. Food's good, Ray said, feeling awkward now. Eliza Martinez, Luis's wife, makes the best tamales in 3 counties. And, might be useful for your research. Get to know the local farming community. I'd like that, Vicky said, her expression warming. Should I bring something? Just yourself. First-timers get a pass on the potluck rule. Ray gestured to his dust-covered clothes. Need to clean up first. Could meet you there. 6 o'clock at the Methodist church in town. I'll find it, Vicky assured him. And Ray? She smiled, the first time she'd used his first name. Thank you for the invitation. As Ray drove home, he wondered what had possessed him to invite Vicky Chen to the community dinner. She was still essentially a stranger, one with unclear motives and corporate connections. But there had been something genuine in her help today, in her willingness to learn and adapt to unfamiliar work. And despite his suspicions, Ray found himself curious about her, about the contradictions she embodied, the story behind her carefully constructed professional facade. Back at the farmhouse, Ray showered and changed into his one decent pair of jeans and a clean button-down shirt that Sarah had given him for Christmas the year before she got sick. He even trimmed his beard, which had grown unruly over the past weeks of harvest preparation. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself without the layer of field dust and fatigue that had become his normal appearance. The Methodist Church was a modest white building at the edge of Hartwood, a town of barely 2,000 souls that served as the commercial center for the surrounding farm community. The parking lot was already half full when Ray arrived. His truck now sporting a plastic garbage bag duct taped over the broken window, a temporary fix until he could afford proper repairs. Vicky's 4Runner was already there, parked neatly in a visitor's spot. Ray felt a momentary hesitation as he approached the church basement entrance. It had been so long since he'd attended a community function. Would people even want him there? The taciturn farmer who'd withdrawn from everyone after his wife's death. The warm light and buzz of conversation spilled out from the open doors. Ray squared his shoulders and walked in, immediately enveloped by the familiar sense of home cooking and the overlapping voices of neighbors. The church basement had been transformed with folding tables arranged in long rows, each covered with mismatched tablecloths and loaded with potluck dishes. At the far end, a serving table held the main courses, Eliza's famous tamales, Bill Harper's smoked brisket, Pastor Mike's legendary fried chicken. Around the room, perhaps 60 or 70 people mingled, a cross-section of Heartwood's farming community. Ray spotted Vicky near the entrance, engaged in conversation with Eliza Martinez. She had changed into a simple blouse and slacks, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked more relaxed than Ray had seen her, laughing at something Eliza had said. Ray Callahan, as I live and breathe. The booming voice belonged to Bill Harper, a cattle rancher whose property adjoined Ray's on the west side. Bill clapped a meaty hand on Ray's shoulder. Didn't expect to see you here. Finally decided to rejoin the land of the living? Huh. Something like that, Ray said, accepting Bill's enthusiastic handshake. How's the herd? Surviving. No thanks to this damn drought. Bill's expression sobered. Had to sell off 20 head last month. Couldn't afford the feed. He nodded toward Vicky. See, you've met our visitor. Interesting lady. Says she's doing some kind of crop research on the old Johnson place. She is, Ray confirmed, not offering any additional information. She's helping me bring in my wheat. Bill's eyebrows rose. You accepting help? Hell must be freezing over. Desperate times, Ray said dryly. Amen to that. Bill glanced around, then lowered his voice. Heard Pinnacle's been sniffing around your place. They made me an offer last week. Insultingly low, but an offer. Ray felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air-conditioned basement. You considering it? Bill shrugged, the gesture not as casual as he likely intended. Got 3 kids in college, Ray, Margaret's medical bills from her cancer scare last year, and the drought. He trailed off, the unspoken reality hanging between them. Many in the room were facing the same impossible choices. Before Ray could respond, Eliza Martinez approached, Vicky at her side. Ray Callahan, Eliza said warmly, pulling him into a hug that defied resistance. About time you showed your face at one of these dinners. Been busy, Ray said, returning the hug awkwardly. Eliza had been Sarah's closest friend, had been there through the worst of the cancer. Her embrace carried the weight of shared grief and enduring affection. Too busy for good food and better company, Eliza chided gently. Ms. Chen here tells me you've been working together. She speaks highly of your operation. Ray glanced at Vicky, surprised. Does she now? I was telling Eliza about your impressive soil management techniques, Vicky said smoothly. The moisture retention in your fields is remarkable given the conditions. It was the sort of detail only a genuine agricultural researcher would notice or care about. Ray found himself re-evaluating Vicky yet again. Come, both of you, Eliza insisted, guiding them toward the food tables. Eat. There's plenty, and you look like you've been working too hard and eating too little. Ray Callahan. The next hour passed in a blur of good food and conversation. Ray found himself reintegrating into the community he'd withdrawn from, catching up with neighbors he hadn't spoken to in months or years. He observed Vicky moving through the room with natural ease, engaging farmers in detailed discussions about their operations, listening more than she spoke. Whatever her true purpose in Heartwood Valley, she was genuinely interested in the agricultural community. Ray was finishing a slice of Mabel Johnson's apple pie when Pastor Mike clinked a glass for attention. The room gradually quieted. Friends and neighbors, and the pastor began, his deep voice carrying easily through the basement. Thank you all for coming tonight. In times of hardship, community becomes even more important. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Pastor Mike had been serving the Heartwood Methodist Church for nearly 20 years. He'd baptized children who were now adults, married couples, buried the dead. He knew every family's joys and sorrows. As many of you know, we've been discussing ways to support those hardest hit by the ongoing drought. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that the Church Council has approved the creation of a small emergency fund for farm families facing immediate need. This announcement was met with surprised exclamations and scattered applause. Resources were tight for everyone, making the church's gesture particularly meaningful. It's not much, Pastor Mike continued, just $20,000 from our building renovation fund, but it might help a family keep the lights on or put food on the table while waiting for crops to come in or government assistance to arrive. Ray felt a tightness in his chest. $20,000 was a drop in the bucket compared to what most farmers needed, but it represented significant sacrifice from a small community church. It was also exactly the kind of initiative that had always made Heartwood resilient neighbors, helping neighbors through the worst times. Applications will be completely confidential, Pastor Mike added. See me or any council member for details. No one needs to know who receives help. As the formal announcements concluded and people began to mingle again, Ray noticed Vicky in quiet conversation with Pastor Mike. She appeared to be asking questions, her expression serious. After a moment, she reached into her purse and handed the pastor what looked like a business card. The pastor's eyebrows rose as he read it. Before Ray could wonder further about the exchange, Bill Harper approached again, this time with a grim expression. Heads up, Bill muttered. Maxwell just walked in. Ray turned to see Sean Maxwell entering the church basement, dressed casually but still managing to look out of place among the farmers in their work clothes and Sunday best. Maxwell nodded to a few people as he made his way through the room, his smile not reaching his eyes. What's he doing here? Ray asked quietly. Probably trying to figure out who's most desperate, Bill replied. Vulture at a dying campfire. Maxwell spotted Ray and changed course, heading directly for him. Callahan, he greeted, his tone falsely jovial. Didn't expect to see you socializing. Thought you'd be out working your fields until midnight. Even farmers eat dinner. Maxwell, Ray replied evenly. Maxwell's gaze shifted to Vicky, who was now approaching their small group. Ms. Chen, we meet again. Small town, isn't it, Mr. Maxwell? Vicky's greeting was polite but cool. I was just learning about the strong community bonds in Heartwood. Quite impressive. Community bonds don't pay bank loans. Unfortunately, Maxwell's smile remained fixed. Speaking of which, Callahan, I heard Heartland First is shopping your note to potential buyers. 44 days and counting. Correct? Ray felt his jaw tighten. My finances aren't your concern, Maxwell. They could be if you'd consider Pinnacle's offer. Maxwell lowered his voice. Which, I should mention, decreases with each passing day. Assets in distress lose value quickly. Bill Harper stepped closer, his bulk imposing. That sounds mighty close to harassment. Maxwell, this is a community dinner, not a business meeting. Maxwell held up his hands in mock surrender. Just making conversation. No offense intended. His attention shifted back to Vicky. I understand Martinez couldn't salvage that old combine. Shame about your barley experiment. Without proper harvesting equipment, all that research data will be lost. The implication was clear. Maxwell knew Vicky's project was in jeopardy and was enjoying her predicament. Ray found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. Ms. Chen has access to my equipment, he said flatly. Her barley will be harvested on schedule. Surprise flickered across Maxwell's face, quickly masked. How generous of you. Callahan, I wouldn't have expected such cooperation. Then you don't know much about how real farming communities work, Vicky interjected smoothly. Neighbors helping neighbors is standard practice here. From what I've observed, Maxwell's smile tightened further. Of course, the famous Heartland values. He checked his watch. Well, I just stopped by briefly. Early meeting tomorrow with some Heartland First executives. We're discussing several outstanding loans in the area. His gaze fixed on Ray. Very productive conversation so far. After Maxwell departed, an uncomfortable silence fell over their small group. Bill Harper shook his head disgustedly. That man is the reason farmers keep shotguns, he muttered. No offense to your corporate connections, Ms. Chen, but Pinnacle is destroying this community one foreclosure at a time. No offense taken, Vicky assured him. Not all agricultural investment follows Pinnacle's model. Ray was only half listening, Maxwell's parting comment about Heartland First replaying in his mind. If Pinnacle was meeting with bank executives tomorrow, it likely meant they were preparing to purchase multiple loan notes, accelerating their takeover of the valley. His 44-day countdown might be optimistic. I should head out, Ray said abruptly. Early start tomorrow if we're going to finish that wheat. Vicky nodded, seeming to understand his sudden need to leave. I'll be there at sunrise. Ray made his way around the room, saying brief goodbyes to neighbors who seemed genuinely pleased he had attended. Eliza Martinez made him promise not to wait so long before the next community event. Pastor Mike pressed a flyer about the emergency fund into his hand, which Ray accepted without comment, knowing he would never apply. Others needed it more. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars brilliant in the clear sky. Ray stood for a moment beside his truck, breathing deeply, trying to process the evening's revelations. Pinnacle was moving faster than he'd anticipated. The community was rallying, but too little, too late. And Victoria Chen remained an enigma helping him harvest, integrating herself into the community, yet still withholding crucial information about her true purpose. Ray. He turned to find Vicky standing a few yards away, her expression serious in the dim light of the church parking lot. Maxwell was trying to rattle you, she said quietly. It's a negotiation tactic. Create fear, then offer a solution, their solution. I'm familiar with the approach, Ray replied. Saw it plenty in the Marines. Psychological warfare. Vicky stepped closer. You meant what you said about letting me use your equipment for the barley harvest. I did. Ray wasn't entirely sure why he'd made the offer, but he wouldn't retract it now. My backup combine isn't pretty, but it'll get the job done. Thank you. Vicky seemed about to say more, then hesitated. There's something you should know about my work here. Ray waited, sensing she was finally preparing to reveal something substantive about her true purpose. Vicky glanced around the parking lot, ensuring they were alone. The barley research is legitimate, but it's part of a larger assessment. My company is evaluating potential investment in this region, not just in crops, but in infrastructure, processing facilities, distribution networks. What kind of investment? Ray asked cautiously. The kind that keeps family farms operating independently rather than being absorbed by corporations like Pinnacle. Vicky's voice had taken on an intensity that seemed to come from deep conviction. Sustainable agriculture doesn't have to mean corporate takeover. There are alternative models, cooperatives, vertically integrated farmer-owned operations, direct-to-consumer networks. It sounded too good to be true, which in Ray's experience meant it probably was. And your company is, what? A charitable foundation because profit-driven investors want returns, not agricultural utopias. We believe sustainable family farming can be profitable, Vicky countered, with the right structure, the right technology, the right market access. It's a longer-term investment strategy, but one with more stable returns. Ray studied her in the dim light, trying to gauge her sincerity. Why tell me this now? Because I need allies who understand the local landscape, farmers who know this community, who have credibility. Vicky met his gaze directly. And because after working alongside you today, I believe you might be someone I can trust. The statement hung between them, weighted with implications neither fully understood yet. Ray wasn't used to being trusted by corporate types or trusting them in return, but there was something about Victoria Chen that defied his usual skepticism. Trust goes both ways, he said finally. And you're still holding cards close to your chest. Ms. Chen. Yes, she acknowledged without hesitation. Some details I can't share yet. Corporate confidentiality and strategic considerations? Ray nodded, unsurprised. Well, I appreciate the partial honesty, at least. See you at sunrise tomorrow. As he drove home through the quiet countryside, Ray found himself contemplating Vicky's words about alternative models for agricultural investment. He'd heard similar pitches before, from well-meaning academics and slick corporate representatives alike. Most had proven to be impractical, exploitative, or both. But if there was even a slim chance that Victoria Chen represented something different, a genuine alternative to Pinnacle's scorched earth approach, it might be worth exploring. Not out of naive optimism, but out of the desperate pragmatism that had kept him farming while others sold out and moved on. 44 days until foreclosure, a crop half-harvested, a mysterious corporate researcher offering partnership, and Maxwell, circling like a vulture, ready to pick his life's work clean. Ray Callahan had faced long odds before, in combat and in farming. But as he pulled up to his darkened farmhouse, he wondered if this might be the battle he finally couldn't win. The summer rains finally came to Heartwood Valley, gentle drops falling on parched soil that had forgotten the feel of water. They came too late to save last season's crops, but just in time to give next year's a fighting chance. Standing in his field, Ray Callahan watched puddles form in land that had been dust just days before. The deed to his farm remained in his weathered hands, though the path to keeping it had cost him more than pride. It had demanded trust, something far harder to give than the sweat and blood he'd always been willing to sacrifice. Victoria Chen had disappeared as mysteriously as she'd arrived, leaving behind drought-resistant seeds, a repaired combine, and a community slowly stitching itself back together. The corporate battle that played out over their valley had changed the landscape forever, revealing that the true value of the land wasn't measured in bushels or dollars, but in the hands willing to work it honestly. Some said it was luck that brought her to his broken fence that dusty afternoon. Ray knew better. In farming, as in life, there are no coincidences, only seasons of harvest and fallow, each teaching us what we need for the next. Perhaps that's the secret wisdom of the land. Everything we save ultimately saves us in return.